Welcome to the SPSS video tutorial on comparing within-person means using repeated measures and mixed Anovas. In this video we will cover repeated measures Anovas as well as mixed or between by within repeated Anovas. As in the past several videos, we'll be using the therapy data, and the variables we'll be focusing on will include the therapy type, which includes the control, CBT, and humanistic therapy, as well as depression at times 1 and 2. These are the only variables we'll need for this particular data. First, we'll be looking at a repeated measures ANOVA. In this case, our repeated measure is depression because we've measured it at time 1 and time 2. We'll be testing whether there are within-person differences in terms of an increase or a decrease in depression over time. To do this, we'll go to Analyze and General Linear Model with repeated measures. What comes up in the default window here, it'll ask you first to name your within subjects factor. It provides a default name of factor 1, but let's change that to depression. It also asks you for the number of levels. In this case, our number of levels is 2 because we have depression measured at 2 time points. It's possible, however, to have depression measured at 3 time points, 4 time points, etc. This can handle many more levels than we're using. We'll simply illustrate it with a 2-level model. Make sure we click Define, and then we'll have to show which variables correspond to our within-persons variables. Depression at time 1 is moved to the first, and depression at time 2 is moved to the second. For now, we won't include any between subjects factors or covariates, but we will click Options and be sure to include our descriptive statistics and estimates of effect size. Let's look at the results. First, we see that our depression is measured with depression at time 1 and time 2. We see the overall means for depression at time 1 and time 2. People started out with depression scores of 46.45, and at time 2 it was lowered to 41.86. We can look at our multivariate tests. Your instructors will describe the differences between these to see that they are statistically significant. Your instructors will also talk about sphericity, as well as the differences between Greenhouse Geyser, Kuhn-Felt, and the lower bound models of within subjects effects. All of which in this case, however, show that the effect is statistically different. That overall, across everyone in our sample, they showed lower depression at time 2 than at time 1. But what if we want to look at depression across our 3 therapy groups? We want to see if there are some groups, like the control for example, that should not change from time 1 to time 2, but our humanistic and CBT groups that should change from time 1 to time 2. Here we'll go to Analyze, and again the General Linear Model, and our repeated measures. Our depression factor remains the same because we're still looking for depression between time 1 and time 2. We'll define that. But we'll also add therapy type as our between subjects factor. In this case, under Options, we'll also include both of our main effects and our interaction, and we'll ask it to compare our main effects for our post hoc tests. Once we click OK and we scroll down, we'll notice that we have a within-person measure of depression as well as a between-person measure of therapy type, control, CBT, and humanistic. We get the means for each therapy type at each time, as well as time 1 and time 2. We see our multivariate test for our within-person effect. Again, your instructors will tell you what the differences between each of those tests are, as well as our multivariate tests for our interaction, depression by therapy type. In this case, you can see that depression is significant. The drop from depression from time 1 to time 2 is significant, and there's a statistical interaction between therapy type and depression as a repeated measure. We'll scroll down here to look at the tests of within subjects effects, again for depression as well as the interaction of depression and therapy type. Down below, we'll see the between subjects effects for therapy type alone, which is also significant. We can scroll down below this to see the means. We see the comparisons between the therapy type themselves as a between subjects factor, as well as the pairwise comparisons between each of those. Scrolling down further, we see the comparisons between the two depression categories, right? The statistical difference between depression at time 1 and depression at time 2. And if we scroll even further, what we see is the therapy type by depression interaction. We see that depression actually increases in the control group slightly, from 59 to 62, but in our two therapy conditions, our CBT, depression drops from 34 to 27, and in our humanistic condition, it drops from 48 to 42, thus representing our statistical interaction. Again, in this illustration video, I've only shown 2 levels of repeated measures, as well as 1 variable as a between groups factor. However, mixed Anova is more flexible. You can add more than 2 repeated measures, 4, 5, 6 variables over time, as well as multiple between subjects factors to build interactions.